Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome again in this NPTEL course on Introduction to Law on Electricity. In this lecture, we will be discussing the law relating to transmission. If you recollect, we have made this distinction and made this point very clear that 2003 Act has categorized certain activities as licensed activities and certain activities where license is not been needed. So, the activity for which license is not needed we have already discussed, that is generation segment. Now, we will be discussing the activity for which the license is been made mandatory to be a player in the power market. So, that is transmission. Now, in this section we will cover this concepts, we will understand that what are the provisions related to transmission, how the sector has been reformed, what are the challenges which are there for this sector and how these challenges are being addressed either through the necessary legal changes or by liberalizing the sector further in order to get the desirable result. Now, transmission, as I said, is a licensed activity, and you would find that there is a definition given of transmission line in the Act, that is section 2 subsection 17. When you look at when you visualize the infrastructure or the kind of graphical arrangement of a power plant, you find that there is a generating station which generates power, and from there the power gets evacuated and ultimately it reaches to the load center. Now, in between this there is a role of the transmission sector which facilitates the evacuation of the electrical energy from the generating station and and ensures that it reaches to the load centers in a very smooth manner without much of the losses, and this is what is been defined as transmission line under the Act. To elaborate it further, generally what happen is that the power plant generates electricity of a lower voltage, maybe 11 kV or 33 kV, then it has been stepped up with the help of transformer, and then higher voltage is being transported, conveyed through the transmission line, and then again at the distribution point again it is been stepped down to a lower voltage, so that the end consumer or the retail consumer get the electricity as per the voltage which is being specified. So, this is what is the kind of representation of the line segment, and there you can very well visualize that how transmission sector plays a significant role in overall development of the power market. As I said to you that transmission is a licensed activity, that is what is given under section 14 of the Act. Section 14 deals with that what all activities are been categorized as the licensed activities. Now, now when you look at the significance, when you look at the importance of this segment, if any state, if any government makes a necessary policy change to attract the investor in the generation segment, that very encouragement, that very investment would not bring in necessary reform would not bringing necessary result unless and until transmission sector has also been adequately strengthened. So, there is a saying, in fact, if you read the literature you would find it has been indicated that if one wants to reform the power market, the reform should begin with the transmission segment. That is what is being suggested. Why? Because generation alone is not enough. Once the electricity is generated, it needs to be transported, it needs to be evacuated, and for evacuation of the electrical energy you need to have a very efficient transmission system, and that is why it has been said that transmission network is needed. In fact, it is one of the prerequisites for growth of the power market. Any overlooking, any ignorance of this segment would certainly be very fatal, and that is what we also experience when you look at the Indian position, where much is needed to be done in order to match up with the reform which has been introduced, reform which has really brought the result in the generation sector. Now, it is well known that if evacuation capacity is limited, if the generated electricity energy cannot be effectively evacuated from the generating plant to the load center, then there will be a lot of wastage, and this wastage can be minimized only when we decongest the transmission sector. So, the effort is needed, and that is what is been aimed in the law, that this sector needs to be decongested, because congestion in the transmission segment, congestion in the transmission network adversely affects the whole chain system, the whole supply chain system of the power market. Now, in this regard, it has been suggested that when you are bringing in reform in this sector, transmission must be a prominent agenda for furthering that reform, and that is why much before 2003 Act, it was suggested that let transmission be considered as a distinct activity, let it not be clubbed with other two activities which are associated with the electricity market, that is generation and the distribution. So, 1998 Act amended the law, made the necessary changes in the 1910 Act and 1948 Act on electricity supply, and acknowledged that transmission be a distinct activity, and thus it has been said that let the central government or the regulatory commission deal with the transmission licenses, central government to deal in situation of interstate transmission, and state government or state regulatory commission to deal with intrastate transmission. That is what is the scheme which has been provided. Now, carrying forward the reform which has been introduced in the transmission segment, the concept of transmission utility was continued, which was given the responsibility to plan and to coordinate the growth of transmission network. So, transmission utility was introduced with this idea that let them put in the thought together that what is needed to bring in necessary growth, what is needed to make a kind of effective planning for this segment. And for the purpose of this very objective, in the year 1998, Power Grid Corporation was established. Now, Power Grid Corporation was established for the purpose of the central transmission utility. It was designated as central transmission utility, and then you have electricity board or a government company which shall be state transmission utility at the state level. So, this reform was been brought in. What was introduced through 1998 Act continued under 2003 Act, and section 39 and section 38 deals with this very aspects. Because we know very well that certain technical aspects are to be fulfilled in order to effectively participate in the evacuation of the electrical energy and to supply it to the licensees or to the consumer. Central Electricity Authority was given the role to suggest that what are the technical standards to be followed. So, supervisory role is been given to the Electricity Authority to plan the development of the efficient network. Now, why it was thought to be done at the central level, why it was decided that let the necessary standard be suggested by the central agency, because the generation of electricity has its own geographical constraints. For example, coal based power plant are more in the eastern region, hydro is more in northern region, up north, and then you find renewable somewhere in the south or also in the eastern region. Now, if we want the integrated power system where the generated electricity should be transported from one region to another region, then we need a pan India planning. What we need is a mechanism which shall work throughout the country, and that is why Electricity Authority has been entrusted with the responsibility that you supervise and suggest that what is needed to develop the efficient networking in this segment. Now, because of the geographical condition, as I said, that there has been a constraint of ensuring the availability of electricity in the deficit states or proper evacuation of electricity from the surplus generating states. Now, this issue can be effectively addressed only when we have well integrated structure, well integrated system in the country, and the Act decided to provide for region wise geographical demarcation for this integrated system, and that is where you find that institutions like Regional Load Dispatch Center, National Load Dispatch Center and State Load Dispatch Center was established, and it was established obviously under 2003 Act, but prior to that also it was being mentioned under 1998 Act. We will have a separate session on load dispatch center, what are the powers, what are the functions, we will study that in next session. Now, 2003 Act, as I said, continued the concept, because it was a viable solution in order to attract private participation as well as to bring in efficient management in the functioning of transmission sector. And that is why the idea of transmission utility continued under the 2003 Act, but then certain changes were being introduced, and those changes were being introduced to attract private participation, to attract more investment in the transmission sector. Earlier what was happening was that it was the transmission utility which was approving the application submitted for obtaining a license, and that approval was in a way stamped and notified by the regulatory commission. So, you can very well visualize a situation where transmission utility engaging into transmission business is evaluating the application from the applicant who wants to enter this business. It is not very difficult to imagine that biasness may creep in while undertaking the evaluation process. And as a law student, we need to understand that any decision making influenced by biasness is not sustainable in law. So, in order to avoid that conflict of interest, what was suggested that let this transmission utility play a role, but not of deciding on the approval of the application, not to decide that whether such application is to be considered or not. Let it only recommend. So, the transmission utility is being now allowed to recommend that whether the application is to be accepted or not. It is for the regulatory commission to grant license. That is what is given under section 15. Now, in order to meet the requirement of granting the license, the law suggests that let there be publication of the interest shown by the applicant, so that objections can be invited, and if the appropriate commission decides not to accept the application, it has been suggested that reason must be given that why the application is not accepted. And what is the basis of this? The basis, the premise is that if the government wants to attract private investment, then transparency must be the key feature, so that necessary confidence will be there, necessary trust will be there in all those who wants to participate. And that is why this process has been categorically laid down, that once the application is submitted, it has to be notified, and at the same time the rejection, if the application is rejected, it must be backed by, it must be it must be backed by the reason that why it is rejected. So, principles of natural justice is being required to follow. It is advised that the applicant should be made aware that on what ground the application has been rejected by the commission. So, that is what is the process which has been laid down. Now, why this recommendatory role? Why the transmission utility is still being asked to play the role? One is to avoid unnecessary congestion in the network. Perhaps the capacity in that region is enough to cater both the generating unit and the distribution licenses, and thus it is not advisable to go for erecting towers and laying down the transmission network. Because transmission utility is already there in the market, because it is already operating on the ground, the input of the transmission utility would certainly help the appropriate commission in taking a call which would be plausible, which would be more scientific, and also it will be in the interest of the market. That is why this role has been conferred upon the utility. Now, in this segment, like distribution licensee, which I will be discussing in lectures to come, even in this segment, the law envisages the presence of more than one transmission licensee. That is what is clearly spelled out, that parallel transmission licenses are possible. We can have multiple licenses in one region. And why this is needed? Because already this segment is controlled, or major control is of the government. If the idea is to invite private capital, it is suggested that they must also be allowed to operate without any discrimination, and thus it has been provided that non-discriminatory open access should be the governing principle in this sector. There shall be no discrimination to the private licensees if they are allowed to operate, if they are allowed to play, if they are allowed to do business in this segment. This is needed also for implementing the idea of multi-buyer model. If you can recollect, I said this while discussing the salient features of 2003 Act, that one phenomenal change which the Act has introduced in this sector that is discarding single buyer model and introducing multi-buyer model, where the choice has been given. And in order to make this happen, there is multiple license provision is needed, non-discriminatory open access is needed, and only when you find multiple players participating in this segment, the sector becoming competitive. and if the center becomes competitive, it will cater to the need of the consumer. Now, because transmission utility has a very important role to evacuate and to ensure the supply to the distribution licensee or to the consumer, it has been suggested that they should not be allowed to engage in trading. If they are allowed to engage in trading, then what will happen? That the infrastructure will be used to advance the cause of its own clientele. And that is why transmission licensee, they are being debarred from entering into the business of generation and trading. They cannot. They are not allowed to be a generating company, and also they are not allowed to do trading. The moment you take these activities away from transmission utility or licensee, you would find that they will participate, they will play the game in a very fair manner, because they do not have any vested interest. They do not want to promote one generating company over another, they do not want to facilitate one licensee over another. So, they will go by the rule of the market and they will facilitate each participants in a fair manner, and that is why the law categorically prohibits them to engage into trading. So, what is their responsibility? They do have a responsibility only to maintain and upkeep their transmission networks. That is what is their responsibility, that they need to maintain. Regular maintenance has been needed, so that transmission network should not collapse, and that is very vital, because blackouts happen because of non-maintenance of transmission network. The supply of electrical energy gets hampered because of absence of maintenance. And how do they maintain? They would be maintaining it from the tariff what they would be charging for the use of their network, and that tariff is to be determined by the appropriate commission under section 61 or 62. So, there also it has been suggested that let there be a tariff formulation in a fair manner, and let the transmission utility get the necessary revenue for meeting the requirements of the licensees, get the necessary revenue to maintain its network. Now, as I said that transmission sector plays a significant role in connecting one region with another region throughout the country, and that requires a proper coordination. And for furthering it, three institutions are being established: NLDC, National Load Dispatch Center, Regional Load Dispatch Center, and State Load Dispatch Center, which has a responsibility of planning the optimal scheduling and dispatch of electricity, so that overdrawals should not happen, so that over injection should not happen. All these are the responsibilities, and we will be discussing it in detail in the next session. And then because transmission network is responsible for carrying the electricity on a very high voltage ranging from 100 kV to 700 kV. It is very well imagined that such activity may put the life of human beings in danger or life of living creatures in danger. And therefore, electricity authority has been suggested to provide for the measures which is needed to protect public from such dangers. The mandate is provided under section 54 of the Electricity Act. Now, as I said to you that private participation is what is desirable goal, and that is why the necessary tweaking has been done in the legal scheme also, so that if private participations come in this segment, they will augment the strength, they will make the system more efficient, the management will be professional. Though the success story is not very the success story is not very remarkable as on date, but then gradually perhaps we would find more private players entering into transmission business also. For this, it has been provided that if any private player wants to do this business, they can always go for it. 100% equity owner with 100% equity ownership, it has been allowed. In fact, we do have such player in the market. For example, Sterlite Energy is one example, Reliance Infra is there. Along with it also there is a planning of, there is a suggestion of joint venture between government owned companies and the private players. We have a Tata Power example of that, which is a joint venture between Power Grid and Tata Power. So, that is what is there. But then no denial that more participation is needed. The way power sector has witnessed the involvement of private participation in the generating units, in the generating plant, same way we need to see in the transmission network, so that independent power producers need not struggle to find the consumer. Independent power producers need not struggle to supply electricity to the licensees in qualitative way, and that is why it has been suggested that let there be a private participation. In transmission, there is another important thing, and which also causes a bottleneck in the growth of this, bottleneck in the participation of private players, that is right of way. Now, right of way is about use of land where the transmission tower is erected. Needless to say that it does not amount to acquisition of land as such, the way we see it for infrastructural project. For example, national highway, or for example, when the land has been acquired by the government for some important national activities. In this case, it is only a strip of land which has been acquired, and many a time it so happens that the landowner refuses to part with the land. One, because of the land becoming completely a waste piece for the landowner. Landowner cannot do anything on that piece of land. Other is also out of danger. Other is also because of the danger associated with the wire crossing over that land. So, right of way is something which is also becoming a major concern for the growth of this sector. Though we have a very scientific mechanism in place where it says that what shall be the width for right of way and what shall be the height of the tower, all this is being scientifically established and accordingly the land is being acquired, but still it is a matter of concern. It is not being accepted because of various reasons. Apart from the reluctance of the landowner, there are also issues of environmental clearances. You must have seen big transmission towers crossing through dense forest. So, there are issues that how that should be allowed in the forest land. You must have seen transmission towers in the agricultural land. So, what will happen to the agricultural activities in that area? So, obviously, these issues create a sort of bottleneck for the necessary growth of this sector. 2015, the notification has come from the government. This notification primarily addresses the issue of the payment of compensation, because the rate of compensation was varied from the state to state, and therefore, a demand was being raised that we need to bring a standardized format of compensation. And that is why in this notification it was suggested that let there be 80%, 85% of compensation to be paid as per the land value, and land value is to be determined by the competent authority, be a district collector or any authority as designated by the government. And also it has been suggested that what shall be, as I said, that what shall be the width when the right of way is to be determined. Generally wire zone is being determined, that what shall be the wire zone, and that zone is been kept absolutely obstacle free. Things were being cleared. Even when it comes to the growth of tree, beyond a point, if tree is growing, then it is to be cut in order to make the transmission line clear. So, these are the issues, these are the challenges which are somewhere creating the necessary bottleneck in the growth of this segment. That is all for today's session. Thank you for joining.